Hello, I'm gonna we're gonna give folks 5 or 6 minutes to hop on, and then we'll get going. But thanks everybody for joining today, and looking forward to this discussion.
Have we got Nancy?
I don't see her yet.
I'll text her.
Okay. There she is.
Good.
Hello, hello.
Hi, I am so
Hi.
sorry.
No, you're fine. You're right on time. So, and we're just
Yeah,
giving folks 1
Well,
or 2 minutes to hop on. So
I have to tell you all, I had, there's something wrong with my computer. I'm using the iPad, so I hope it continues to work.
you look good right now. You're good
Yeah,
right
well,
now.
Thank you.
No, all good. Well, let's give folks 1 or 2 more minutes to people
Great.
hopping on, and then we'll get going. But
all
no,
right,
can
that's
hear you
fine.
guys loud and clear.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I have to tell you, one problem is that our state is protecting me from Zoom. So we have these workarounds
Right.
when you want to use it.
Yeah. I heard we tried to do a Zoom early on with Secretary of Commerce, and she had to call in because she wasn't allowed
Yeah.
to.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's ridiculous. I mean, we use Zoom all the time, just not
Yeah.
for these things.
It does seem a little bit silly. I don't think it's any less safe than GoToMeeting or any of the other ones that are
It's much simpler.
Yeah, it is much simpler. Yep.
It is.
Maggie?
Yeah.
If this is, did you see this?
Hey,
It's not
hey.
what you have. I want what you have to go over this.
All right, well, you know, I gave you,
This
yeah,
one.
Yes, you did. I sent
yeah,
it.
yeah. Look, Brooke's got hers. Brooke
Got
has
mine.
hers.
Maryland.
Got mine too, yeah.
Yeah.
And I told Nancy where to get it.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
good. Good, good. Okay, for
I-
those who are just joining, thank you so much for joining us today. It's great to see you, and we're going to give it 1 more minute because folks are still hopping on. Thanks.
I got my sister and her entire family Ravens face masks.
Nice.
You could,
Nice.
you could start problems within families in the Washington area.
No, I got everybody. Don't worry.
Yeah.
Plus, no one, there's going to be a market for a non-Redskin, but that football team
Mhm.
mask very soon. People are not going to be wanting to wear Redskin things.
Right, that's right.
Mhm.
There's a market. Someone's going to make some money from this.
Yep. Yep. Okay. Let me just finish.
Maggie, are you going to have a briefing with David Romans like B&T did?
Yeah, we did yesterday.
Was it helpful?
Yeah. Mhm,
I thought it was.
mhm,
I thought it was really quite good.
mhm.
B&T's. I saw B&T's this morning. I'm going to go back and watch yours. I think that the temper of it was much more open and collegial,
Yeah, I agree.
and that makes a huge difference.
It does. Okay, we're going to be live on Facebook now.
Okay.
Here we go. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm delighted to have folks here and delighted to be coming to you live on Facebook as well with Chair Maggie McIntosh of the Appropriations Committee and our Treasurer, Great State Treasurer, Nancy Kopp. So thank you for joining us today. We were going to have Vice Chair Michael Jackson join us as well. Unfortunately, he has had a death in the family. So he let us know earlier today he was going to be able to make it. So our thoughts are with him. So my name is Delegate Brooke Lehrman, and I represent with my teammates, Senator Bill Ferguson and delegates Robin Lewis and Luke Klippinger, the 46th district in Maryland in the General Assembly, although we are proud to be representing the 46th, but we of course work at the state level to pass and implement policies that affect the entire state. And I'm excited today to be talking about our state budget. I'm just going to say a few words before we begin and before I turn it over to Chair McIntosh and Treasurer Kopp. I think if there is one thing this pandemic has done besides cause so much unnecessary suffering and death, it's also really crystallized the pre-existing inequities in our society and the lack of resiliency in our communities, government institutions to support families, small businesses, and nonprofits. I've held a series of online briefings since coming home from our General Assembly session on topics from how to apply for benefits to the digital divide and supporting our frontline workers. And I'm excited this month to be having a number of discussions, including about our budget, about public education, higher ed, redlining, And I do these, and I'm so pleased to have other officials on today, because I think we all believe that being an elected official, being in public office, is about more than just passing legislation, right? It's about connecting people with the resources that they need and driving discussions about important topics and advocating for change in multiple ways, including through discussions like this one. So why a webinar on the state budget? Well, it's all about the budget. Wasn't it Joe Biden who said, don't tell me your values, show me your budget and I'll tell you your values? So, you know, and as our state comes to grip with the most dire financial crisis of our time, monitoring and managing the state budget has never been more important. And it's so important that, you know, residents around the state really understand the process, understand where their money, our taxpayer dollars, are going, and know how to advocate as well. Governor Hogan has proposed, you know, $1.4 billion in cuts from the budget that we passed this past session, many of which could hit Maryland's lower income families the hardest and include slashes to our arts community and programs that help prevent crime in Baltimore. You know, Treasurer Kopp will talk about the role of the Board of Public Works, and really grateful to her for her no vote last week against some of these cuts as well. So I am hosting this webinar just so we have a clear and better understanding of the current status of the budget. We'll discuss, you know, some of the revenue projections, what the proposed cuts mean, and how the process works. So I'm really delighted. We are going to start with Treasurer Kopp, who I think will talk a little bit about, you know, revenues, the BPW, and what she sees moving forward in her role in the budget process. And then I'll turn it over to Chairwoman McIntosh to discuss the appropriations process, the FY21 budget we passed, you know, some of the cuts and what she sees coming down the line. So really delighted and thrilled to have you both here today. You know, Nancy Kopp, my former elected official, my former representative,
It was a while ago.
Yes, quite a while ago, from Montgomery County, and she, after she was first elected to the General Assembly in 2002, and then reelected as treasurer, and she's our 23rd Maryland state treasurer since the adoption of the Constitution in 1851. And only the second woman ever to serve as state treasurer. And right now, she's the only woman serving Maryland in a constitutional office. And of course, chief among her responsibilities is your role on the Board of Public Works. Maggie McIntosh first entered the House of Delegates in 1992 when she was appointed to fill a vacant position, which had neighborhoods in both the city and the county. And then there was redistricting, and she fought hard and won a great victory to stay, and she has served in multiple important leadership roles in the General Assembly. And she started on the Appropriations Committee, and then you left for several years, and she led the Environmental Matters Committee, and now she is, of course, chair of the Appropriations Committee and doing such great work and being such a great leader there. So delighted to have you both on today, and I'm going to turn it over to Treasurer Kopp to start things off. So it's all yours. Treasurer?
Thank you, Brooke, and it's good to be here. I think this sort of meeting is so important. I wish all of your colleagues in the House and Senate were doing meetings like this. Many are, but it's a way to reach people and to start a conversation, not just about the folks or with the folks in Annapolis, but among all of us. Yep. Let me just tell you very briefly what the state treasurer does, because you might be wondering what it has to do with anything. State treasurer's jobs vary a great deal from state to state. So I can tell you about Maryland. I can't tell you about the entire nation. But in Maryland, we have several important functions, all of which fit together in a fiscal process, and all of which have brought us to this day. In the beginning, we have the Board of Revenue Estimates, the comptroller, who's elected at large, Peter Francho, the Secretary of Budget, the Governor's Secretary, David Brinkley, and I sit on the Board of Revenue Estimates. And we look at the estimates coming in. They are calculated by the comptroller's staff using models, using consultants, and then presented to a committee that represents all of the agencies, including the legislature. The committee looks at the projections and hands them to the Board of Revenue Estimates. And this happens 3 times a year. It happens before the budget goes in, and the governor is constrained. So what the governor puts in his budget is based on the Board of Revenue estimates. The legislature then works on the governor's budget, and as Chairman McIntosh will tell you, and you know very well, Delegate, the legislature can cut the budget, but can't increase it and can't move things around within it. And then the legislature passes the budget, and the budget is always projected to be balanced at the end of a fiscal year. The fiscal year runs July through June. So in March of this year, the legislature passed the budget, which went into effect this week, last week, the 1st of July, based on the revenue projections which we gave them in December. Well, this has worked very well for our state, and it's one of the reasons this system has worked to assure that we always end the fiscal year with a balanced budget. And that's our goal. Our goal, of course, is to have a great state and a budget that is socially responsible and fiscally prudent, but it's also to balance that budget at the end of the year. And the legislature in Maryland and in most states is part-time. In Maryland, it's a 90-day session, although the committees, I'm glad to see, are meeting in the interim and doing important work and bringing out important facts and trying to present with transparency that you don't always get the situation to all the people. But when the legislature is not in session, the Board of Public Works, the governor, the comptroller, and the treasurer meet to approve all expenditures, but also to cut the budget to assure that it is going to be balanced. Now, the legislature in years past has met to cut the budget itself, but the last time that happened, as I recall, was in about 1992, and it was a very, very difficult series of special sessions. And since then, budget cutting in recession times has been left to the Board of Public Works. I mentioned 1992 because that, in my experience, was the worst that we had gone through, worse even than 2008 in the Great Recession. We took cuts like doing away with general public assistance, which was the state-paid basic public assistance to people in dire need who were not mothers of families. So it wasn't the federal AFDC program, it was a state program. And under Governor Schaefer, the legislature resisted at one session, and the next session went along and cut it. I think it was about the worst vote I have ever cast, and I truly regret it. So I'm very sensitive when we come to this. It's a very difficult thing. At any rate, when the legislature left town, our budget was in great shape. We have an extraordinary surplus. We have a strong rainy day fund. Everything was going well. And then, of course, the pandemic hit. And within the last quarter of the fiscal year, April, May, and June, we've seen our budget crater, essentially. The revenue on which the budget is based, the general fund part of the budget, not federal and not special funds, but the general fund is mostly sales tax and income tax. And as you can imagine, the sales tax goes down when businesses aren't open, and the income tax goes down when people lose their jobs. And so based on the models coming out of the Comptroller's Bureau, although the Board of Revenue Estimates has not put out new official numbers, we are projecting at least, or we were projecting in May, at least $900 million below what had been anticipated in December. Now, that's a lot of money. And in order to balance that budget, the Board of Public Works took about $120 million in cuts in May. There were reversions from state agencies. There was use of some surplus. There was use of some of the rainy day funds and some federal funds. And so we've made it through 2020. We won't have the exact numbers until August, but that budget will be balanced. What's before us now is the budget that started last week, 2021. And the governor started off with some cuts, as you mentioned, Delegate. I didn't think that the first day of the fiscal year was the time to take the cuts. Before we knew all the money that was coming in, and before we knew what the federal government was going to do, and before we knew how to move, whether we were going to move some reserves around. So I voted against that. But there's no doubt that even if there is no second wave, even if there is more federal funding, and there ought to be, and I hope there will be, and I believe there will be, we still are going to have to look at this budget and prune it back, and perhaps override the governor's veto of the tobacco tax increase and look at other increases. With an eye towards looking at all the funds that are out there, towards looking not just at cuts, but enhancing revenue and looking at what those cuts do. I started out by mentioning general public assistance 30 years ago. We have to make sure that the people who are hardest hit now are not hit again the hardest in balancing a budget. I mean, that's just not reasonable. It's not fair. It's not the way it should be. So I think we should have, as I mentioned, a broad public discussion. And I know the committees in Annapolis will be having, so we understand what the problem is. I've given you a brief overview of where the money comes from, where it goes. The chairman, I'm sure, will tell you. You have to be in a way like Willie Sutton. He was an old bank robber and asked why he robbed banks, and he said, "That's because that's where the money is." Yeah. You've got to understand that where funding goes, some cuts will go too. But it should be open, it should be transparent, it should be fair, and look at the numbers. And I turn you over to your expert.
Thank you so much. That was a great overview of the process, and I think it's helpful for people to understand the importance of revenue projections and the role of the Board of Public Works, which is a really unique body in America.
It is absolutely unique.
So some friends have, I've heard people call it sort of a mini legislature because when we're not in, it gets to decide things. So thank you.
Yeah.
I'm going to turn it over to Chairwoman McIntosh to talk about what she sees going forward, the FY21 budget and the role of the legislature and all of this. So thank you. Oh, you're on mute. There you go.
There we go.
There you go.
I have to tell you, Treasurer Kopp mentioned those votes nearly 30 years ago, in 92, 93. You should know that I was sworn in to take a couple of those hard votes in December of that year, so that we could in fact balance the budget before we started the new fiscal year. So my first vote was in a special session. It was in it was in 1993, and it was to take dramatic cuts to the then existing budget. So I remember that vote, and I also remember something else about serving on the Appropriations Committee at that time. Number one, there was a delegate, Nancy Kopp, who was my subcommittee chair, who I mentored under, and it has served me very well through the years in the legislature. So I'm always grateful to be on any kind of panel or discussion with Nancy Kopp.
Mutual.
The other thing I do remember, and Treasurer Kopp, you can join in on this, is I think during that particular phase where we had a downturn in our economic growth, we made some terrible mistakes. And Treasurer Kopp has just mentioned one, that we instead of trying to really invest in our workforce and invest in retraining people to get them back into work and invest in in programs that created jobs, we didn't. We cut the capital budget at that point in time, thinking that, well, if you're cutting the operating budget, you've got to be cutting the capital budget. And for those of you listening, the capital budget is the bricks and mortars. It's what builds our public schools, our highways. It builds all of the state facilities, and it also helps a lot of organizations do their building too through a match or grant program. But we actually cut the capital budget. So what did we cut? We cut jobs.
Schools.
And we cut the safety net and we cut jobs. Now, I think the next time that I had to live through was the Great Recession that just passed us in 2007, 8, 9, 10, living through that. I think then Governor O'Malley led us through that recession that time in a much better, shall we say, glide path. He also had a president of the United States and a Congress who sent help to states and localities to get through this. And I'm going to start by saying, all of you on this call, when you get off the call, just call your congressman, talk to anybody that you know of any influence in Washington, D.C. States and localities need help from the federal government right now. And that is the only way we will get through this without really pretty, I think, dire pullback in programs that we care about. So, I had up until, the beginning of March, one of the best sessions I've ever had. My committee was instrumental in passing House Bill 1, the school construction bill, that is going to give our large counties a boost in school construction, needed schools. I served on the Kerwin Commission for 3 years, and we got that passed in a way that I felt so strongly. Finally, we were addressing the needs of at-risk kids in this state when it came through K through 12 education. And we passed a bill on, community colleges, getting them more money in the budget. We also helped historically Black colleges and universities in the budget. And we did a number of things that I think this year were just terrific. And all of those right now are in limbo. Number one, the governor, by the way, vetoed every bill I just mentioned. And we are going to have to come back to the legislature and decide how we, in fact, approach this, what will be a Great Recession because of the pandemic. I do want to fully acknowledge what our fiscal leadership and our fiscal office recognize and help, bring home to me the fact that the $1.4 billion in cuts to the general fund that the governor has proposed may be what is actually needed to get us through FY21. The awful news is that at this point, everyone is projecting that we could have as much as $3.4 to $4.8 billion more that we would face in shortfall in FY22. That would be devastating to so many programs that we care about. And that's why we do need the federal government to intervene at this time. So, what should the legislature be doing? Well, first of all, I want to say that, the governor took $610 million that he proposed as cuts to the Board of Public Works. And thanks to Treasurer Kopp and to Comptroller Francho, not all those cuts were made. The cuts that were taken off the board, that meeting will come back again, I'm sure, in either August or September, were cuts to mainly that would have impacted our state employees, that would have impacted, I think, Baltimore City and Prince George's County, more so than any other counties in the state. And that was because of a teacher retirement supplemental grant and the disparity grant. But once again, I mean, just think of this, the disparity grant. That's for a grant for our counties that do not have the taxing income needed to operate their counties. And it's a grant that we give those counties to actually help them because they are also the home of the state's working poor families. So what did we do? We had a proposal to cut disparity grants. That again, I think, is short-sighted. It's going after folks who need the safety net the most. But not all the cuts were made. About 215 million cuts were not made because of the comptroller and the treasurer, and they'll be revisited. But among the cuts that they have laid out in the total package of 1.4, there are $200 million worth of cuts to K through 12 education. Not stipulated, no outline for it. There are cuts to the 4% increase in salaries that we tied to our increase in minimum wage for people who are working with the most vulnerable populations in our state. And there are many cuts to programs that I'm sure people on this call care dearly about. So how do we, those 700 and some million dollars for the cuts, about $750 million for the cuts, will happen when the budget is introduced in January, and when the governor presents his budget. Those cuts, they have laid out what they're going to propose in that budget, and it will take legislative action. We will have to agree for those cuts to be made. So the legislature does play a role in about 50% of the cuts outside those that the Board of Public Works and the governor himself can make through executive order. So that's what we have looking forward to us. So I think you'll see Board of Public Works may be taking more action in the fall. I think you'll see a very lean budget with what they've already outlined to us as some steps that they want to take. And I think you'll then see, and it's in the form, by the way, of a budget refinancing act. I think you'll see the legislature have a lot to say about many of those cuts in the direction we go. I'm going to say that I am absolutely starting, the drumbeat with my colleagues about all we're doing is talking about cuts. When are we going to start talking about overriding vetoes on bills that would give us needed resources so that we can avoid these cuts? When are we going to talk about the fact that during the Great Recession before, we did look at some areas in our tax code that could have been modernized and modernize that tax code, and it helped us through that recession in a way that we did not really harm greatly our K through 12 system or any other systems in the state. And I think we ought to look at probably the best roadmap we have for our children in Maryland to get them through and work through this pandemic and get them back on track again is sitting right in front of us in the form of the Kerwin bill, the blueprint for Maryland. No time better now. In fact, we need it more now to have the blueprint for Maryland in front of us. We may have to alter the dates. We may have to, phase it in more slowly, but we have the blueprint sitting in front of us. So I'll stop there and see if there are questions, from folks who are on about specific things in the budget. I'm happy to talk about it.
Great, thank you. That was excellent. Really appreciate that. And there were, there were a number of questions that were emailed in first, and then questions in the chat, and we're happy to take questions in the chat as well. So there were a couple questions that were emailed in that I'll start with, and several had to do with the rainy day fund and other existing balances. as a couple of folks said, if this isn't a rainy day, when it is, to what extent do you support, or do you think we will be drawing down on some of those funds that have existed and that sort of sit there for, you would think, for days like this?
Yeah, you want to go first, Nancy, or do you
Yeah,
want?
yeah. Let me just kick it off. And the rainy day fund, when the legislature left town, was at about $1.1 billion. The rainy day fund is required. The goal is 5% of our revenue, of our budget, in the rainy day fund. And the rainy day fund is one of the reasons we are a AAA rated state, as is our responsible action in cutting budgets and in raising taxes. The governor, with the legislature's approval, took a relatively small amount from the rainy day fund to balance out 2020. But through using federal funds and other things, I think we'll bring it back to about $1 billion or $1.1 billion. The rainy day fund, however, has to be replenished by law when you take it out. There has to be a plan for replenishing it. My impression, and the chairman can take up here, my impression is that the governor's intention is to take whatever cuts he can to look at all the number and use the rainy day fund as a sort of a cushion at the end of fiscal 2020, and to do the same sort of thing in 2021. But again, to remember, if the federal government doesn't come through, if we are faced with $3 billion in reduced revenue over 2 years, 3 to 4 billion, a $1 billion fund is a one-time use, and then it's gone.
Right.
Yeah, and I would concur. The Appropriations Committee had a presentation from the Secretary of Budget Management yesterday, and he indicated a willingness, and their willingness to, in fact, use the rainy day fund both at the end of FY20 and FY21.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. That's great.
Let me just say, it's also very interesting. I was in the legislature starting in 1975. In all of those bad times, we never used the rainy day fund, and I always thought that was ridiculous.
Yeah,
it's there for rainy day.
It's there for a reason, right? We're saving
it's
it
raining
for a reason.
Absolutely.
Yeah. It's raining. Yeah. And I neglected to just wanted to welcome to everybody, but a special welcome to my colleagues who are listening in today, Delegate Robin Lewis and Delegate Mark Corman. So thanks for joining us today and listening in. A couple other questions. I know we have some in the chat as well. There's a question about, and are we absolutely required to have a balanced budget? And yes, we are. And then there's some follow-ups. Is it time to increase the sales tax, have a luxury tax? Should we pass a special wealth tax? And I think, we did pass a number of taxes, of revenues that were either didn't make it through the Senate or were vetoed by the governor. I don't know if Delegate Chairwoman McIntosh, you want to talk a little bit about some of the revenue options that we looked at and others that we may need to consider?
Yeah, I think we had it in the final analysis around $300 million for the revenues that we passed, maybe slightly more than that. But it was sports betting, it was a cigarette tax, it was the, what they call the Facebook
online,
digital online services and sales tax. I mean, there were a number of increases that we had, and those were all, by the way, targeted at that time to pay for mainly the blueprint for Maryland that grew out of the Kerwin Commission, and we did put some in to help fight or offset costs for the pandemic and that might come along. We had those bills at the very end, and we realized, that the governor would be needing money for PPE and other things. So, but, I do think it's time when you get to a juncture like this, people say, oh, well, everybody's hurting, you can't raise taxes. Well, we have some very antiquated tax policies in this state that are not current at all. And I will give you one example that we made a change in the last 3 years that is saving us right now a lot. And that is, it wasn't until 3 years ago that we applied a sales tax to most online shopping and online purchases in the state of Maryland. So when Amazon moved into the state of Maryland, they then said, we will pay a Maryland sales tax on all the goods that are purchased, here in Maryland. But it was only 2 years ago that we closed another loophole, and we called it the Wayfair bill.
Right.
It wasn't just Wayfair, but it was all the other online venues, that you could buy from. And so here we are now. We have this pandemic. Retail stores have been closed, and the only way you can buy anything right now, even at the grocery store, for many of us like me, is online.
Right.
So we would have missed capturing all of that sales tax had we not acted 2 and 3 and 4 years ago. There is a lot to be said about looking forward to our new economy, our digital economy, and asking the question, where should we be moving to capture, sales tax and other revenues that will help provide the education, the safety net, the public safety, the public health services that people need from their state.
Right. Yeah. And do it in a way that's more progressive.
Absolutely.
We are not burdening, right? The sales tax often really burdens
Brooke,
lower income and working class people.
Could I interrupt for just a second?
Yeah, of course, please.
I think the chairman points to something that's so important. I think looking at all of this in terms of priorities and actual people and programs and communities, what are we here to do? What are our priorities? Not just look at a list of things to cut as though it were just a list and numbers. And I do agree with Maggie. I think in 2008 and 9, we had a governor who didn't want to cut the budget, but we ended up cutting some billions, but it was with an eye towards keeping certain things intact, education, including higher education. So I just think we have to have a change of orientation and not just look at competing lists of cuts, but as Maggie said, where we want to get out in the end, where we're going to be in this new world, and everyone has got to participate.
Right.
End of editorial. Thank you.
No, absolutely. This is for editorializing. That's what these are for. So no worries. Another question is that I think is really relevant, and I think in this state there's been less transparency than in other states because of the role of the governor and in the budget making process, is where all the federal CARES Act dollars that the state has been allocated have gone. Right? I mean, I know. So we had a hearing last week on housing. And, I asked the HCD, is this CARES Act money? Is this money that that's coming in that you're going to be using on rental support, the measly sort of $20 million that they put in? And he said, yes. And it was, it's like, can you just tell us where all the money is going that wasn't sort of pre-programmed by the federal government? The state got quite a bit. And I'm curious to hear, from your briefings yesterday or throughout, if you've seen any sort of comprehensive list or plan or how you think that's going.
I'll start there and tell you that DLS, the Department of Legislative Services, did in fact point out to point too far or too one of the problems that we're having with this process right now is the lack of transparency coming from the administration on the kinds of where they're using this money. And the only thing we know, and I've got a list here about how.
Oh, you just got muted for some reason. Come back.
The only I do have a list here of some of the uses for from the relief fund, but we only know it because there was a press conference or there's a press release. So it's through press releases that we are getting information, just like the general public, but basically they did give out the local government grants that came from the CARES Act that frankly, I think they were required to do. They have set aside 100 million for K through 12 remote learning, 100 million for targeted tutoring initiative, 90 million for state higher education institutions, 50 million for small business assistance, 50 million for nonprofit recovery, including 3 million for the Arts Council Emergency Relief Fund, and then 30 million for eviction prevention, which is what you referred to, Delegate. 10 million for broadband, rural broadband, 5 million for urban broadband issues, and there's currently 450 million unallocated. So, you know, as the Sun Paper's editorial staff wrote recently, we hope that they'll work with the legislature and work with our citizens around the state to have a more transparent decision-making on how they spend that money.
Yeah, absolutely. There was also a question about if Congress allocates money directly to states in the next round of COVID support, how can the General Assembly influence how the governor spends these funds? Are funds held until the session starts in January?
Yeah, actually, I thought our congressional team did a really good job in a couple of areas where they allocated very directly to the counties or to the school districts. Something that you may not know in the CARES Act is that these allocations for a good portion of the K through 12 education money was done directly to the districts. So it did not go through necessarily the state bureaucracy. They did the same thing for our larger counties. So populations of 500,000 or more, like Baltimore City, Montgomery, Prince George's, Baltimore County, et cetera, got direct CARES package allocation. That's in recognition of the fact that our larger counties with the more dense populations were going to be the ones that were going to have the issues with fighting this pandemic. But we will, depending on how Congress, in fact, does this next package, which I hope comes, we'll probably be dealing with a lot of the same issues where we have to wait until the budget is introduced to have a say-so.
Right, that makes sense. There were a couple people wrote in questions about some of the issues that are going on about renaming and making sure that we are not sort of celebrating, you know, Confederate icons, and whether there might be a fund created to help jurisdictions or schools rename roads or schools or structures that carry Confederate names. And that, I thought it was an interesting question.
It is.
You know, there's a cost to doing stuff like that. So wondered if anybody had brought that up or there'd been thought or talk about that sort of thing at all.
I haven't heard it, but whoever sent the question in, following up through you, please kind of flush that out with us, and I'd like to follow up with that.
Yep.
You know, I think in Baltimore, you know, a couple 3 years ago, we took down several statues, so on and so forth. I thought that was a very good move, done in the middle of the night, no fanfare. It was fine. But yes, I think we should do a check on whether we need to do some renaming.
Yep. So I want to be cognizant of everybody's time. So I think there was another question that I missed, and then we'll do some final comments on next steps in the budget process, perhaps to wrap things up. And there was a question on, furloughs for state employees. Has there been discussion about furloughs? Obviously, you know, that's on a lot of people's minds because it's happened in the not so distant past. And so could you talk a little bit about discussions of furloughs or what's been spoken already?
Well, I'm going to let the treasurer take the lead on that, because she actually did take the lead on the discussion at the Board of Public Works around this.
Yes, I had to unmute myself. Yeah, as you mentioned, Delegate Learman, the cuts related to personnel in general were removed from the Board of Public Works agenda last week. But there is no doubt, depending on the amount of the cuts, and we still don't know what they have to be,
Right.
that there will be some impact on state employees. I don't want to sugarcoat it. And it does seem to me, again, going back to what Maggie said, what the chairman said, if you look back at 2008, 9, and 10 and see the way it was done, I think that may be a roadmap to a way to reduce expenses without laying off anyone. And that was to institute furloughs of a certain number of days, say an average of 10 days or 8 days across the state, but have higher paid employees taking more of a furlough, having some of the lower paid employees taking very little furlough, and then in terms of the employees themselves and their salaries taking out in little bits all the way across the year, so that nobody is hit with a pay day with significantly less payroll. The governor in the beginning wanted us just to take money equivalent to 8 days across the board for everybody equally. It was one of the things that we did not agree to, and most particularly because he wouldn't reveal how it was going to be structured.
Right.
So I would say to our employees, yes, no one is going to be held harmless. But again, I think we should look at it within the terms of our state priorities and making sure that we don't, again, go in and hit the most vulnerable the hardest.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's a good, I think that's the right way to think about this. And I don't know if you want to share some sort of closing comments on this process and what you see going forward with the folks who are participating. I'll give you each a couple minutes.
Well, I'd like to say again how important I think transparency and an open conversation are, and a recognition. All our priorities may not be the same. We may not share everything, but I think we share a great deal. And if we can help explain basic function, where the money comes from and where it goes and where we want to be down the road in terms of a state, a community, we can all get through this together. And I agree with the chairman that the way it was done in 2008, 9, and 10 compared to early 90s should be a roadmap for us. Unfortunately, the governor was elected on a platform of cutting taxes and fees and downsizing government. So it's more difficult, I think, for him to get to that point, but I hope we will all be there together. You mentioned my delegate, Mark Corman, is listening. And I will be there to support you, Mr. Delegate, as you lead forward.
We all will be.
Thank you.
Yeah, we will. You know, I don't want to get off track. I want to actually, I have something I want to ask everybody on the call to be aware of coming up in the election in November, other than the obvious.
Yeah.
But I will say this, you know, I'm very concerned, really, about the budget over the next 2 to 4 to 5 years. And the reason I am is because of what we all see on CNN and whatever station every day. And that is that we have, I think, more than half of America taking this pandemic seriously, but we've got a large portion of America that's not. And that is going to keep this virus among us much longer than we ever wanted or anticipated that it would be. It's not even about a vaccine. It's about doing the right thing in public health. Long story short, that makes me say to everybody, we've really got to band together and figure out a positive a way out of this, one that invests in where we want to go as a state and who we want to be as a people. One of the ways every person on this call could help is this. We passed a bill in the legislature. Towards the end of the legislature, everything was rushed because of the time frame. We were told we had a week to get everything done and get out, but it was a bill that you're going to have an opportunity to vote on as a constitutional amendment in November on the ballot. And what it does is it gives the legislature, your representatives that you elect in your district, a slight bit more control or on oversight of the budget and direction of the budget. Historically, through Republicans and Democrats alike, the legislature has always, during the budget process, cut here, found efficiencies there, figured out a way to pay for something different than the governor had submitted the budget. And then we would direct it, like to education or to pretrial services, or something that we felt our constituents felt that should be enhanced or be supported more in the state budget. It was a small amount that we were able to do, but we were able to do that. Through every governor that I think I can name, and I know that the treasurer can name, we walked out of there and those monies were released. And this governor has not released money for school construction, not released money for education, has not released money for the arts, has not released money just because he looks at it and says, oh, the legislature did that. I didn't do it. Well, we've had a bill that's been introduced several times over several decades by Republicans and Democrats that gave the legislature slightly more power, basically saying we could do these moves as long as we kept the budget in balance. And as long as we did it within a certain small percentage, we couldn't go in and wreck the entire budgets of agencies. And to make it even a little bit sweeter, we said this wouldn't take effect until after Hogan is gone. So the next governor would come in under these rules. And we gave the governor, whoever that governor might be, he or she, the ability to line item veto something that they might really disagree with what the legislature did. But I want you to know that you live in a state that has the governor has more power than any other governor in all 49 states remaining over the budget, and makes it very difficult for your local elected officials to put an imprint on policy and fiscal policy and the direction of a budget. So this is going to be on the ballot. It is balanced. It has good checks and balance, and that good delegate, Mark Corman, took it to the floor and did a great job getting it through, by the way. So we hope you will support it and tell your neighbors and friends and organizations you belong to how important it is for this to be passed this November. And I thank you.
I think that's a great way to end. It's an incredibly important ballot initiative that people aren't talking too much about right now because there are other bigger things further up the ticket that we're all working on. But it will make a huge difference going forward for the state and will bring more transparency to the process too, I think.
Yes, it will.
For spending money. So thank you for raising that. Many thanks to both of you, not just for joining us today, but for all the really incredible work that you do to make sure that we are passing a fiscally prudent and socially balanced or socially responsible budget, balanced budget every year. And for all your work, Treasurer Kopp, on the pension board and on the Board of Public Works, really speaking up when you need to, even if it's 2-to-1 sometimes. It's nice when it's 2-to-1 our way. Right? But no, really appreciate your work. And I think everything you said is absolutely true. We, during this pandemic and during the ongoing challenges, we have to be really mindful that we're not just rebuilding, but that we're building better, right, as we move forward, because we have to look forward, and when we're making cuts, they have to be strategic and narrow, so that we're investing in our neighborhoods and in our schools and jobs and in kids moving forward in an equitable way, building more resiliency as we go along, and not hammering things so that we can't move forward in the long term.
Right.
A huge thank you to both of you for all your work, for joining. Thanks to everybody for being here today. Please keep in touch. I'm so grateful for all that the participants here do, for everybody who is here joining us. Please spread the word. We have a number of other great webinars coming up Tuesdays and Thursdays at 2, and I'd love to have you and others join us. So keep in touch, stay well, and take care. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Brooke.
Bye, guys.
Thanks. Bye.